Welcome to the Supplement Engineer Podcast. My name is Robert Schnitsky. Today we are joined by Ben Esgro, founder and chief operating officer of Novo Nutrition. Ben holds a master's in Pharmaceutical Chemistry and Sports Nutrition and Exercise Physiology. He's also a registered dietitian, certified strength and conditioning specialist, as well as an accomplished powerlifter and natural bodybuilder. Suffice it to say, you've got a lot of stuff done in your days on this earth, Ben. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'd like to think there's a lot more that I can still do. So,
now I know you've touched on the origins of starting De Novo on a few podcasts before, but let's get a quick recap on just your personal history. I know before we started this call, you said you got your start kind of on the bodybuilding.com forums, as many people in this industry did start. So let's start there, and what led you to jump into when you could have gone so many different avenues with your background?
yeah. So that was, as we said before the call, it was kind of an epicenter of a lot of natural bodybuilding and fitness. Just starting points for so many people who are prep coaches, people who are competitors, and people who are actually, on the scientific creation domain of things. So it started with being a competitor for me. And obviously, as a competitor, you always want what you see as the edge. And I wasn't the most genetically gifted competitor. So I think the way I phrased the problem for myself all the way from the beginning was basically, I'm going to need to do everything right or as perfect as I can to get as far as I can in competing. So that obviously meant diving deep into learning programming, learning exercise phys, learning nutrition, and the supplement end. And I always just had an inkling. Maybe you could argue and say there was a hope there that there was things were as effective in the supplement domain as they were being presented. But either way, I think it was first the intrigue that got me in, and that was back when I was in high school and creatine was the ingredient. And in many ways, so some people could argue creatine still really is the ingredient. The supplement industry is still trying to find the next creatine. But as I dove in, I found that getting an education in supplement ingredients and especially supplement mechanisms was very complementary to what I was doing in school, and it made it practical and it made it stick. Because obviously, if you go in and you learn about chemistry and reaction kinetics and ideal gas law and stuff like that, it can sound very abstract if you have nothing to stick it to, no framework, if you don't want to be a lab chemist doing inorganic synthesis or something. And that wasn't me. So the supplement end was really what made science seem tangible for me. Like I could test something, I could experiment. And so that's really what I started doing is I started just buying my own powders because I was pretty disappointed with what was available on the market now. So people can understand the market then is very different than the market today. Now it's become almost sexy to make science evidence-based formulas. But before it was, everything was a bunch of arginine dumped in, arginine and I think ketoisocaproic acid, and I forget what the other alpha ketoglutarate. So a lot of things that have really faded from the industry since, and it's made leaps and bounds since then. But what I saw at that point in time was from the consumer end, pretty disappointing, because you can read just if you type into PubMed, you can read and see that the mechanism of these things is kind of faulty. So people are selling you, kind of, it's like pet rock.
Yeah, snake oil.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And then on the other end of the business, it's like, wow, this is wide open. If someone just comes in and does things legitimately, how could you fail? Because people will get something that they can feel that works, and you can easily stand up on your marketing. So that's kind of how it started. I could probably talk for hours and hours further on that, but I know that's not really totally the point of the podcast. So so we'll leave it at that to start.
What year did you found De Novo?
So it started in 2011. At that point, it was protein only. And like I said, really bodybuilding.com and 3DMJ, which is a coaching company, Alberto Nunez, Eric Helms. I think there's 4 or 5 people that are in that collective now, but it really started with Berto and Eric kind of disseminating they bought it, and I think it was Berto's girlfriend who liked it, and then they told the 3DMJ clients, and I lived in Pennsylvania, I still do now, and all of my business was on the complete opposite coast, was on the West Coast. So I was basically making the product and then just shipping everything to California. That was my entire business for like the first 2 years.
Yeah. What early challenges did you experience with getting De Novo off the ground, and how have you kind of seen the supplement landscape change from 2011 to 2019 heading into 2020? Because obviously flavoring technology has grown by leaps and bounds since the early 2010s to what we have today. How else have you seen the industry as a whole change?
So I have a couple different answers to that. I'll start with the first thing you asked, which was what kind of challenges. And I think one of the challenges for me is that the reason I started was for product development. It wasn't so much to, be a CEO, and I didn't even really have a business plan. My plan was make good products. It was never, actually the first few years I broke even essentially. I was working another job, WIC, which is a government nutrition job. I was using that money to fund buying ingredients and then just basically selling at cost, just because I wanted to make stuff. So the first 2 years, there was no real business. It wasn't until I partnered with 2 other people, Ryan Doris and Paul Borst, and moved to Florida, where it actually became like a viable business. So I don't know how well equipped I am to answer those growth problems, because those are really more nitty-gritty business questions. We can address them, but I might not be the best guy to answer them, because, like I said, formulation is really my bread and butter. But in terms of the formulation aspect of the question, yes, the technologies have become night and day. Like flavoring now, you can make stuff taste actually like it's supposed to, whereas before people would accept something tasting chalky or gritty or not fully solubilizing. And that's actually the stuff that gets me excited. Even when ingredients get banned, like 1,3-dimethyl, and I realize I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit with this, but 1,3-dimethyl getting banned is actually what made, in my opinion, Uptopia, our most popular product, get popular, is because I was actually chasing the feeling of 1,3-dimethyl, knowing that we can't use 1,3-dimethyl. So I'm working on the pathways that worked on, just without using that ingredient. So I think it opens up this entire avenue for creativity that is actually exciting for me, not limiting.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned trying to find something that could replace the next creatine. And over the years, we've seen a few ingredients pop up, things like phosphatidic acid, HMB-free acid, with that quasi-questionable research. We'll put it euphemistically.
Right.
Arachidonic acid. Every year, it seems like we've got 1 or 2 new ingredients that comes across as the next creatine, and a few of the ingredients have some decent data, like beta-alanine and betaine. What does it take for an ingredient to compete and even hold a candle to creatine? And have you found anything that can possibly live up to creatine, something like beta-ecdysterones or any of those things?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the problem is it's always a multifaceted issue. You have the issue on the research end, which is it takes money to fund these studies, and lots of money. And that's the thing that people don't understand, is when they come in asking, why don't you have peer-reviewed research for your formula and blah blah, and we usually have to piggyback on the individual ingredient peer-reviewed research, because funding a study yourself could take millions of dollars, literally. So that's one limitation, is a lot of times there's just not quite as much. Our benchmark is pharma. Don't get me wrong, dietary supplements make a lot of money, like it's in the billions per year, but compared to pharma, it's like a drop of piss in the ocean. So that's a big hurdle, and so when you can actually allocate that much funding towards just research and development like pharma can, it's much harder, and it's a much smaller sliver for dietary supplements. So when you do get research published, you can tend to be left with really just the big players funding it and basically funding it to get the answer they want. That becomes a very slippery slope very fast. So just like you said, the euphemisms, I won't go too far down that road, but I assume most people are aware of the questionable things with free acid and phosphatidic, and stuff like that has come out. And I don't think that helps. I think that almost kind of scars the supplement industry more, because it makes people even more skeptical by saying, now you're ruining peer-reviewed science too. Where can we actually go now? So before I drag on too much more, there was a second element to that question. What was it?
How much body of evidence do you need to see an ingredient go? And I'm rephrasing the question and kind of taking it in a slightly different direction. How much evidence or what sticks out about a particular new ingredient or maybe an old ingredient that's kind of been reborn that could possibly vie for it as contending with creatine?
Okay, yeah, it was the creatine thing. So the reason that it is the gold standard is it's not just that one study has come out and shown that it's effective. It's that repeatably studies have come out showing that it produces it's consistent across all the studies, like thousands. There are literally thousands of studies on creatine. So it's going to take time. Number one, it's not going to be this thing that comes out of the woodwork randomly. And I think it's going to take time to actually contend with the acceptance of creatine in terms of an ingredient that actually works, that you can put in products, that's safe, that's effective. So I think that is a very difficult hurdle. And maybe creatine will be the benchmark forever. Or you can frame it a different way, which I think I've chosen to do, which is instead of looking at increasing muscle performance, muscle mass, maybe we can focus on some other variables that we know we can influence undeniably, that won't be quite a challenge to overcome, which is things with neurotransmitters, things with cognition, things with stimulation, with sleep, with mechanistic ideas of things that might not have the punch that creatine does in terms of, wow, I feel this, I see this difference over time, but will have the acute, kind of boost and feeling that you get. Because at the end of the day, and this is the one part of business I recognize in the supplement industry very clearly, is if you can't make people feel something, you're not going to sell products. So like if you're taking a B12 vitamin, at a certain point, it's very easy to forget taking it unless you're B12 deficient, because you're not going to feel it's. You might just see your piss, color change a little bit. That's not enough justification to keep taking an ingredient. Whereas if someone can actually feel that they performed work on the job better, they had better thoughts, they communicated better, that's something that you can work with. So my two answers for the creatine question are, I really think it's going to be difficult because now they've done such a good blanket banning of prohormones. I think it's going to be tough to compete with creatine. Or that might just be me waving the white flag saying, I don't know that I have the resources to find another molecule in physiology that can be exploited like creatine was. But people should know that creatine's been around for like over 100 years, and they've known it was, so it's actually not that new. The second end of it is that I think, well, one more thing is I think that's why SARMs have become popular, because they banned prohormones that were DHEA based, and that opened up an area now which is gray area for SARMs. So I think the more gray area market is doing a good job keeping up with creatine. The people who are trying to stay away from WADA banned ingredients are going to continue to have problems finding the next creatine. So I've just chosen to go a different route is my second part of the answer, which is chasing, I think, cognition and really just getting lost in the mechanisms and seeing if I can find something that pops up and either feels unique or can do something that people don't even know that, or the market doesn't even know can be influenced yet.
Mm-hmm.
Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. Well, since we've brought up the neurotransmitter topic several times, and you said with Uptopia you were trying to create the feel and focus and mood enhancement of 1-3. Let's dive into the formula of that. And so for the listeners, I'll just run down the list of ingredients. We got 500 milligrams of vitamin C, 500 milligrams of acetylcholine, 200 milligrams of caffeine, mucuna extract yielding 150 milligrams of L-Dopa, which is going to be a precursor to dopamine for listeners out there, and then 200 micrograms of huperzine A. It's a nootropic and productivity-enhancing supplement. What I find interesting is there's no theanine in it, but there is a whopping amount of theanine in Ignite, the pre-workout. So let's walk step by step through your methodology and your ideas behind formulating Uptopia, and specifically why this minimalist profile, because we see a lot of nootropic powders today doing the kitchen sink. I mean, they've got things like Alcar, Lion's Mane, huperzine, tyrosine, 16 things. Most of the time they're underdosed. So I'd like to, feel free to rant as long as you want to on your methodology with this formula.
Sure. So I think it starts, I'll use the analogy for music. Let's say you really like 10 songs. Can you fully enjoy those 10 songs if you listen to them all at once, or if you listen to them each separate? At some point, there becomes too much noise to where either pathways conflict with one another. So basically, let's just say the frequency of the sound wave in the music is equivalent to the compound in the formula, mm-hmm. in this analogy I'm using. And this is just a pharmacological concept, which is basically that some ingredients have synergy, some ingredients work antagonistically. Mm-hmm. It needs to start with a mechanism-based approach. A lot of times when you see these, like you say, kitchen sink formulas, there's either no mechanism available for that ingredient, or it's still unclear, which is a problem. Or there's a lot of times there's clear examples of conflicting mechanisms. So let's use L-Dopa, for example. L-Dopa uses an amino acid transporter called LNAT, which is a large neutral amino acid transporter. Mm-hmm. If you combine a large neutral amino acid like arginine, like I think leucine categorizes into that, it will compete with L-Dopa for transport. So a lot of times you'll see people putting in, or even tyrosine, you'll put in an amino acid that competes with that transport mechanism and then try to put in something that's using the same mechanism. There's competition now. So a lot of companies will use L-Dopa and then they'll use it with either BCAAs or amino acid complex or something, and they literally have just wasted their money putting that they've put a great window dressing on the label, but they have completely conflicted the mechanism of that. So it would have been better off for the end user for them not to even have put it in there. Mm-hmm. So I think less is more is really the answer I'm trying to get to. So you need to always start off with, okay, let's start with one ingredient. What is the effect profile of this? You can either test it in yourself. Another fancy word is bioassay it, which comes from Alexander Shulgin, if anybody knows who he is. Interesting guy. That's people's homework. If I'll stay away from that. Yeah. Or you can look at it on paper, and you can look at the pharmacology, and that's like the half-life. That's the there's an acronym for pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. Pharmacokinetics, I'm going to forget this now. It's LADME, so liberation, absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. So that's a whole profile you can look at as how the body handles the drug. Mm-hmm. And then pharmacodynamics is the receptors that the drug acts upon. So how the drug influences the body. Right. So that's always an important starting point of using any ingredient, because what that's going to answer for you is, okay, how does it behave? Meaning, if I take something like caffeine, where will that effect peak at? How long will people feel it? Where will it drop off? Mm-hmm. That's a really important answer to know as a formulator. And then what mechanism does it work on? Because if I'm trying to work either in synergy with that mechanism or not work against it, now I have the answer of what I'm trying to avoid or what I'm trying to go towards. Um, so those are two things that I think are missed almost in every formula, in most formulas I see. Ironically, what that ends up being is pulling back, using less ingredients and letting those ingredients shine and not trying to do everything at once. So when you see someone trying to sell a fat burner, a cognitive enhancer, a pre-workout, a blah, blah in one product, red flags should go off immediately because those are oftentimes largely conflicting mechanisms. That's like telling somebody, I want to lose 30 pounds of body fat and gain 40 pounds of lean muscle. And then do it without drugs. It's like you should go to a magician, not to,
supplements, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that ended up being a little longer of an answer, but tying it back to formulating Utopia versus Ignite is that's kind of always the starting point of theoretically what I'm going for on paper before actually a product gets created is let's look at the mechanisms and let's start one by one and then using those combinations. So it's use creatine with acetylcholine, use huperzine with creatine, or I'm sorry, use huperzine with caffeine, use caffeine with L-Dopa, using them alone and then in combination and seeing, okay, on paper this should happen. Is it happening? And that ends up taking a lot of time. But once you get through, you can create something that feels very unique because you're piling up mechanisms that are working on different things and they aren't creating noise. They're not conflicting with one another. Hopefully that makes sense. I mean, pharmacology can sound almost very abstract and technical. I tried to, I don't know, make it digestible the best I could in what 5-10 minutes. So
no, I think that was perfect. One question I have are on your choline source. What was the thought process behind choosing acetylcholine over alpha GPC? Obviously, choline bitartrate doesn't really cross the blood-brain barrier, and its bioavailability isn't as high. So I can understand leaving that form off. But why choose acetylcholine over alpha GPC? Which I'll just state, I'm a fan of CDP-Choline more than I am alpha GPC. So I'm glad you went with that form. But just what's your thoughts on it?
So I'm actually going to start writing your questions because I want to address every part of them that you asked because they're very good questions. So I'm going to come back to the Theanine one on Ignite versus Utopia, and then I'm going to address the one you just asked.
Sure.
So the one you just asked was why acetylcholine versus alpha GPC. And I'll start there with those are basically the two most research-backed forms of cholinergics that you can use as supplements. Nicotine would fit in there as well, but nicotine is alcohol, tobacco, firearms.
Right.
So the reason those were the two ones that I was looking at in starting the formulation for Utopia. Where it reached a fork in the road, a clear fork in the road for me was that a large chunk of alpha GPC is this glycerophosphorylcholine, which is attached to a bulky molecule that actually is very hygroscopic. So that means it pulls a lot of moisture from the air. If you've ever bought alpha GPC itself, you find that it's either a 50% ratio or a 30%. That's this glycero. Glycerol just means like glycerol. Glycerol is it pulls water very well. That's why it's used in hydration products. But what that means is it will gel. So whenever you put it into a canister, you have a much higher chance of it clumping. And then you have issues with, if you put it in capsules, they'll gel, you have degradation, shelf life. So considering all these factors, I immediately was like, okay, we're going acetylcholine. They both have positive research behind them. And I can actually work much better from a powder delivery system with acetylcholine. So that's why we use that. And then bonus answer for the acetylcholine is the reason we switched, because we did use Cognizin, which is Cognizin is just straight cytidine 5. I'm forgetting what the acronym stands for, but we switched to a salt. And the reason we switched to a salt, which is sodium acetylcholine, is salts have a higher basically charge differential. So they will solubilize in water much better. We were getting complaints that there was some sediment happening in our old formulation. I wanted to address that best we could. Again, it's not just making the best experience for someone ingredient wise and subjective wise, but also as they're drinking it. It's all tied into experience.
Yeah.
So we switched to the salt, and now we no longer have those complaints or the solubility issue.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and I mean, looking right off the bat, you can tell there's a lot of synergy going in there because cytidine or acetylcholine also gives you cytidine, which will precursor to uridine, which will potentiate dopamine release in the brain, which is something caffeine also does, and you've got the L-dopa there to further enhance that and support the synthesis of it, which I think is great. Were there any concerns of getting, I guess, too much cholinergic activity by going with the 200 micrograms of huperzine A and 500 milligrams of CDP-Choline?
That's a great question as well. I didn't really have much concern because I had seen those used before in separate products, never together.
Yeah.
But we had done quite a bit of piloting before that formula ever came out, where we never had issues. We never had anybody get nausea. We never had anybody get anything that was of concern. Which, the thing that blows my mind as a sort of aside here is when people are using Uptopia in combination with other sources of huperzine A or other cholinergics, that's where I get concerned.
Yeah.
But believe it or not, I don't know if people in the supplement industry have just built up a tolerance to insane combinations, or you have a pretty high tolerance. But huperzine in particular is an incredibly potent compound, so and a very long half-life. So I am shocked that people can tolerate that, but no, we've never had any cause for concern, or we never had any issues in piloting. So nothing that ever came up as like, okay, we need to really pull back. And a lot of things like the L-dopa we're conservative with because, yes, I want people to feel it, but I don't want them to feel anything that they don't want to or shouldn't feel either.
Correct. Yeah, and that's my concern. You already touched on something that I've mentioned on several podcasts, is that huperzine seems to be finding its way into every product these days, from nootropics to pre-workouts to fat burners. I've even seen it used in some sleep aids at night, which I still don't understand. I mean, I understand there's some acetylcholine activity when you're in REM sleep and all that stuff, but I don't know if adding huperzine to that will, potentiate those effects to a greater extent or not. I haven't seen any of that in research, at least.
Just really want to get deep into your dreams.
Yeah, I guess so. That's super vivid dreams. So, all right, along those lines, let's touch on the lack of theanine in Uptopia and the inclusion of it in Ignite.
So theanine is it's an interesting ingredient. I think in terms of most uses of it, if you use it itself, it's not much to write home about. But I think in combination, and where it's seen most of its use is usually in combination with caffeine.
Yeah.
On paper, they'll say theanine is calming without being sedating, and I think most of my experience with that would echo that. But didn't really want to pull back in any way from the effects of Uptopia, so there was no real reason to that I saw to include it on a mechanistic basis. Actually, some of the mechanisms with theanine, important side note there is that it's not fully elucidated yet either. There's evidence that it works on multiple different pathways, some of them being actually anti-dopaminergic, so that was another reason why it was left out. But I didn't see any reason to pull back. Our dosing of caffeine is pretty, compared to most other things, it's pretty conservative in Uptopia. It's 200 milligrams. Yeah. So people shouldn't really be getting overstimulated by that. And then when you actually get the overlap of the cholinergic effect plus the dopamine, it actually pulls back as well on any type of overstimulation jitter that you'd get from caffeine. Mm-hmm. So I just didn't think from a combination of on paper mechanisms and subjective mechanisms that it made sense in there. Mm-hmm. The reason that it did make sense for Ignite, and right off the bat, actually, I never even used or tested Ignite without theanine, was because of the issue that a lot of people complain about or have concerns about with yohimbine. So yohimbine is very potent. Yohimbine is very stimulatory, more so than caffeine. It's actually used in um, in veterinary clinics to reverse anesthesia. So it's strong. Um, and we still use a pretty conservative dose based on the research. So research pretty much says around 100-kilo individual should use about 20 milligrams as the effective dose. We use half that because you get the overlap happens very quick between therapeutic dose and I'm going to use the term toxic dose, meaning side effects in terms of nausea or overstimulation. So a lot of people get panic from it and it's like fight or flight. It's largely it works on adrenergic receptors. Mm-hmm. It's very good at that. If you're super sensitive to adrenergic stimulation, i.e., fight or flight, you might feel panicked. If someone responds different to adrenaline release, and they get more zoned in and more aggressive, then they get that response. So it's very individual dependent. What I wanted to do was eliminate that potential segmentation from it to where it really tried to shift people only towards the good and not towards the potential panic. Mm-hmm. So basically, I really wanted to pull back from any potential overstimulation in Ignite, and that's why theanine was included and why it's included at such a large dose. Because we actually started with 300 milligrams per 2 scoops, and we're finding that some people were still getting actually a little bit of panic and overstimulation, so we upped it to 5.
Interesting. I would be very curious to see how it feels, because I've been one of those ardent anti-theanine and pre-workouts. I'm not somebody that gets jittery with caffeine, even taking it, from a small dose like 100 milligrams in a cup of coffee up to like 350, 400, just in my years of testing different pre-workouts. So yep. I'd be curious. When I've tried higher dose theanine in some things where it's usually matched like 1-to-1, if there's a couple of pre-workouts I've tried that have, 350 and 350 exactly, and it kind of leaves me feeling flat. So I'm curious to see how much that big of a difference would hit. But the inclusion of yohimbine is a wild card that I usually don't see added with caffeine and theanine. So I think that's a cool riff on it.
That was the idea, and we do still have some people, which kind of blows my mind, but I can understand it. I think they might just be very high caffeine metabolizers mm-hmm. who say that they don't feel anything, but I can almost live with that over people saying that they're overstimulated out of their minds, or some people will use a little bit more. I will say that it does take a little bit more of a refined palette. I don't know how else to phrase it, to being able to tease out what ingredient is doing what, to know what you're looking for. I think if you're looking for, I want to be balls to the wall stimulated and feel like I'm basically taking amphetamine, you're not going to get that stimulation from this.
Right.
But it does, in my opinion, it does what it was designed to do, which is you feel energized for your workout. It's a pre-workout product, but it's not going to make you bounce off the walls. It's not going to make you freak out. It's not going to make you do compulsive things mm-hmm. That overstimulation often will, and it shouldn't produce anxiety in anybody. So it's basically using the ingredient, getting the effect we want out of it, but just being as safe as we can to not go too far in one direction.
Gotcha. Earlier you mentioned that if consumers don't feel a certain thing, or they don't have some kind of immediate reaction to a pre-workout or a product or a nootropic, then they're probably not going to buy it. So that entire sensation plays into how you formulate a product. Along those lines, a lot of companies put in 3, 4, or 5 3, 4, or 5 grams of beta-alanine in their pre-workouts. Yet you and I both know that beta-alanine offers no acute benefits, meaning you've got to reach saturation before you really start to get the benefits of it. At the same time, they include it for that sensory experience. So why did you choose not to include it in Ignite when, by all implications, that would be something that would definitely light non-sensitized beta-alanine people up?
Right. Yeah, I think it was for a few reasons. One being that we didn't want to just piggyback on this is what everybody else does, so we're going to do it just because everybody else does it. Mm-hmm. The second was it actually becomes, to some level, being unique by not including it, just because everybody else is putting it in there arbitrarily, will not have it. So people have an option if they don't want to feel tingly and itchy and their face tearing off. Um, I have looked at multiple different ways to include it without having the pins and needles, so people could get the marginal benefit from it that research says, but that requires a large dose, and that was the other limitation. Is okay, it'd be nice. Let's say we want to go full bore into that sliver of a benefit that you get out of beta alanine. Well, number one, it's usually only in long duration things. So a powerlifter is not going to feel much advantage from beta alanine.
Correct.
Endurance runner, yes. CrossFitter, absolutely. But you need to go up to around 6 grams. That's uncomfortable. Like if 3 is uncomfortable for you, 6 is going to make you want to leave the gym. Like you're not even going to be there anymore. Like you can acclimate to it, but it's just not comfortable. So there was that limitation. I looked at sustained release forms. They make one called Carnosine SR. Wasn't impressed with it. The mixability is atrocious. It's ungodly expensive. It changed the entire profile of how well the product mixed, and it just didn't make sense. Again, what I said is, the ROI on using that ingredient. Like, does the benefit really make it worth it? Yeah. It wasn't. I looked at actually some ways to counter the mechanism of why you get that itch. Believe it or not, the itch is not related. The component of beta alanine that causes you to itch is not what makes beta alanine work. So you can theoretically block the receptors that cause you to itch and still get the benefit from beta alanine. That was something else I was pretty excited to try to go down, but the only thing I could find natural product wise is actually an oil. So you can't put that into a powder. That's a limitation. Obviously, oil and water don't mix. I don't think there's enough of demand. We also thought about doing just a standalone product for anti-itch. I don't think there's enough demand for that. So it was kind of all these paths of thinking about, okay, is it worth it to actually leave it in for the people who just expect it? Can we justify putting it in at 3 grams, or can we find other ways to buffer without beta alanine? So that's why we put such a hefty dose of citrate salts in. So citrate, like bicarbonate, actually is a buffer. The difference is beta alanine is an intracellular buffer, whereas citrate salts are extracellular buffer. So originally with the formula, I wanted to include both to try to get like a double whammy. Is if we buffer inside the cell and outside, we should actually get more improvement in performance. Again, you run into problems. If anybody's aware of sodium bicarb research, yes, you can improve performance on paper, but 50% of people are going to be shitting their pants, literally.
Right. Yep, massive GI distress when you dose it properly.
Very uncomfortable. If you put it into a formulation and then you use citric acid, you get acid base. You basically are going to create a lava science project in 8th grade. I've done that before, which was actually hilarious. I was making an attempt at a formulation as like an idiot. I did it. I shook it up in a shaker. It exploded the top off in my kitchen. Yeah. Painted my kitchen ceiling nicely. So there's a limitation where citrate is tolerated much better. Citrate salts are tolerated much better than bicarb, but you still require a really high dose. And then you're talking about high sodium load. And then, okay, first, when you're looking at how something gets into the bloodstream from the mouth, you have to pass through the stomach first. Right. If you buffer the blood, you're going to buffer the stomach first. So if you buffer stomach pH, you put a high load of buffer in there, you're going to still make stomach discomfort. It's just not as bad as bicarb. So we actually had to pull back the dose of citrate salts as well. So that's our take on basically still including a buffer without something that's going to make you itchy and getting more of a benefit out of it, because now there's sodium and potassium in there too, whereas beta alanine is just beta alanine. You don't get any electrolytes from it.
Yeah, excellent. I also like the 500 milligram dose of VasoDrive, because every product I've seen it used in goes for the half dose of 254, and I don't think most consumers realize that that dose needs to be doubled. You and one other company, my knowledge, are dosing it that high. Outside of that, everything I've heard from all of the other brands is that it's just too expensive. So
So here's the crazy thing that happens when you use licensed ingredients is not only, yes, can it be very cost prohibitive, but you can't use their trademark name unless you hit a certain dosing threshold either. So you have to call it something else unless you hit certain dosing tiers. And you can understand from a business perspective why they do that.
Right.
But yeah, interesting. I'll give you the real quick and dirty of how I stumbled upon that ingredient. We were doing in one of my pharmaceutical chem classes, we were doing we were looking at peanut peptides that inhibit AVP, so arginine vasopressin, basically something that is something you want to work on for hypertensive individuals, and showing that these peptides from peanuts actually inhibit AVP and can improve measures of hypertension. So as I was doing the assignment, I was like, God, there's got to be other natural products out here that work on this mechanism. So I just dug in and found these peptides from casein that can be isolated, that are isolated and available. And it just so happened that I stumbled upon the VasoDrive, and it includes those three peptides from casein. So interesting how, and that's why I like keeping to go to school, is like I have a feeder of, I have to do this project or assignment for some other reason. Maybe I can churn that out into something that actually works for supplements. So yeah, it's actually a really unique ingredient that I don't see used that much, and if you do, you just see it underdosed.
Yeah. With your master's in pharmaceutical chemistry, do you found that enhanced your understanding of physiology and how to formulate supplements, or did you have a pretty thorough understanding of how the human body worked, and this was more just kind of like to add something onto your belt so you had the degree behind your name to back up what you already knew?
No, I think it's very easy to have, the further you go, it's almost like the more your brain starts to work against you in terms of it's called the imposter syndrome, where you start to question how much you really know and how solid that understanding or grasp of things is, the deeper in you dive. And I think I got to a point, and this was after I made Utopia, where I really questioned, like, can I outdo this? Because the reception to it was great, and the outcome of everybody using it was exactly what I intended. And I felt like I almost fell into creating exactly what I wanted in terms of replacing the feeling of 1,3-dimethyl. And then I almost kind of panicked. We're like, I don't want to be a one-hit wonder. You know what I mean? And I felt like I wasn't able to ask myself high enough tier questions to build and be better than Utopia formulation, meaning like that was the best I'd ever go. If I stayed at that level of understanding and knowledge, I would have only created stuff equally as good, in my opinion. So I knew I had to go back, and I felt that really chem was my largest weakness, in that I wanted to know better how drugs were developed, how the pharmaceutical industry goes through the process of drug development and lead compounds, and looking for alternatives, and basically trying to test their efficacy before it ever comes to market. Because for a drug company, that means a massive amount of money invested, and then they only have the 20-year patent life. So they have that time. Usually they've taken the first 15 in going through the clinical trials, the R&D. By the time they've gotten the patent, they usually only have 5 years left to really take advantage of that. So I thought that would be a really good industry to use as almost like an influence to become a better formulator. And the nice part about this program is that it actually integrates a large amount of what's called pharmacognosy. Basically, pharmacognosy is just medicinal natural products. It's the field that now is becoming replaced by man-made pharmaceuticals, but we still use 50% 50% of lead compounds for drug development are still coming from natural products. So we haven't replaced nature. And I don't think we ever will. And I think we're seeing that with cannabinoids and CBD and THC and derivatives of different cannabinoids. Is like, it's not that nothing is inherently safe across the board. Like, you can kill yourself overdosing water. But there are very unique things that you do see in plant compounds in terms of the spectrum of ingredients that are available together in one plant, how they work in synergy. And we see this with even things like straight L-Dopa versus using mucuna pruriens, in terms of like some of the side effects for people with Parkinson's. So, and again, we see, they call it the entourage effects with cannabinoids and using them medicinally. So there's really a lot there that I don't want to become too influenced by, we have become so great with technology and we have all these computer modeling things, and get lost in all the bells and whistles to forget, like, we have been using natural plant medicines for thousands of years. The like pharmaceutical industry is only 100 or so odd years old. So we have literally grown up with these things throughout our existence on the planet. I'm not ready to totally just, and plus that's what I like about the supplement industry is, you're free to kind of explore, whereas in drugs there's a pressure to patent and isolate, because that's the only way you can patent it, is if you isolate and then derivatize it, basically take that compound and try to hijack it to make it stronger. So I don't know. I'm comfortable in this area now. I don't think I'm going to be jumping to pharmaceuticals anytime soon, but I am fascinated by the development, because you do have to be impressed with the sheer power that we've been able to develop with using computer modeling and docking of substrate to receptor. It's honestly, it's humbling. And that was the humbling aspects of my program, is like, holy shit, this is complex.
And you sort of answered my question in that. Now, my experience and I have a sister who's just recently graduated from pharmacy and finished up her residency and all of that now. And it's been my experience, people in the medical field are genuinely hesitant, and they're resistant to dietary supplements. They think they're all spiked or useless or contaminated, or they're highly unregulated, or potentially toxic. In going through your pharmaceutical chem masters, did that start to lean you more towards the side of being weary of supplements and put you more on like the pro drug side, or you still have that reasoning that natural may be the better way to go, or it's not as bad as it's sometimes hyped to be in the media?
So it's funny, because it's difficult to go through a program and not develop some sort of bias if you are taught and told something from point A in the program. And I think one of the things that I took very quickly and have used ever since from the dietetics field is that just because something becomes the standard and the indoctrination of the field doesn't mean it's right. So one example is like the American Heart Association, who could never depart from the fact that fat is the killer and the cause of cardiovascular disease, and not willing to overturn or overchange, that viewpoint, because their heels are too far dug in. And I'm not saying carbohydrates are evil, but there's almost this resistance to accepting, or there was when I was in dietetic school, to accepting that like 60% of your daily intake should not be carbohydrates. And the whole protein fearing thing. And obviously from all of my experience in bodybuilding and fitness, and now what you're seeing more and more in the research, obviously protein is not going to melt your kidneys. It's not going to, do all these crazy things that a lot of times standard dietetics programs, hopefully they're not teaching anymore, but that was still a big part of my dietetics education. So you realize that it's almost this trickle-down effect from a lot of the industries that fund or develop out these programs and are trying to be a feeder to putting professionals in these fields to keep pushing the same message. So I think when I went in from my experience in supplements, I knew that a lot of those scare tactics or those positions, I was automatically going to be skeptical towards, especially because when you dive in and you look at drug research, drugs are not inherently safe. Just because they're FDA approved does not mean they're inherently safe.
Correct.
We have seen drug recalls. They have killed people. They still do.
Yeah.
They still cause irreversible effects in people. Drugs are not inherently safe just because they've been stamped by a governing body that is largely funded by the pharmaceutical. So I think that there was that end, and then there was also the other side of it, which is the director of my program actually was from Germany. So he did his PhD in Germany, and a lot of his experience and interest are in natural medicinal products. So I never felt like we were getting this real biased education or pitch. And all of the classes with him were my favorite. And actually, we had classes on dietary supplements, which were the most in-depth I've ever taken and I've ever found since, because it's very difficult to find an education in supplement mechanisms and in what it even means to have standardization. What's 4-to-1? What's 20-to-1? What is, X percent? All of these exotic sounding compounds that in normal language you never talk about. Like you never talk about hydroxycinnamic acid or even like xanthines and methylxanthines, which is just caffeine.
Correct.
So I think being able to shed some light on that is very good, and I'm very thankful to have gotten it from that program and that director of that program, because I didn't feel slighted in any way towards anti-supplements.
Interesting. Earlier, you mentioned that you, with Uptopia, you've kept the formula mostly the same, and you haven't really tweaked it. Yet in the industry, a common trend is for companies, in order to stay relevant and present in the consumer's mind, to either constantly release limited edition flavors or release a new spin on a pre-workout every 6 months or every 3 months, every 6 months. As a company, how do you, and as a formulator, do you ever struggle with that you feel this urge or this pull to constantly reformulate your products to stay, keep up with the Joneses, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly where I feel most torn as an owner of a company who's also the formulator, because sometimes I feel like I'm being forced to choose between making a business decision and a science decision, and I always historically have chosen science, and that can be very tough when the industry as a whole seems to be choosing business decisions. And I will be the first one to tell you that the best way to get a boost in sales for a short period of time is release a new flavor, release a new product. It's basically tried and true, and it's very reliable. And if you don't do it, you will just basically see this decline because people think you're not staying relevant. You're not staying up with the Joneses, so to speak. But that's never going to make me come out with something either prematurely or where I can't fully feel confident in its mechanisms and its effects in people that we've tested it in piloting and then in myself. So I'm always the first one who's going to use any formulation, and then kind of refine from there. So I truly believe if it's not broke, don't fix it. Like, you don't see a drug company come out with a blockbuster drug and then try to change it and then put 3 other drugs in it just to keep it relevant. Like, if it works, it works. But I do think, in a way, yes, the supplement industry, that is a darker side of the supplement industry, but I'm not willing to play on that side. And it is the long game for sure. But I like to believe that what will happen is people will eventually funnel towards companies like us after they finally kind of exhaust their tolerance and lifespan for all the bullshit. Hopefully they don't leave supplements completely and they end up coming to, more reputable brands. Gotcha.
Perfect answer. Let's turn to whey protein, the product that really got y'all going out the gate. Y'all have a blend of whey protein isolate and whey protein concentrate, and you fully disclose or openly disclose on the website and the label how much you're getting of each, which not many brands do. There's 3 or 4 that immediately jump to mind that I could say that do that. Y'all are one of the few. I have some reasons why I think you may have gone with those two forms, but give us your insight why you chose those two forms and the amounts you did of each.
So I think I'll start on that in telling you that the formulation of the whey has changed. It's kind of evolved throughout the lifespan of the company. So in 2011, when it first came out, it was just WPC, and there was no lactase, and that was largely a cost thing and a flavor thing. Obviously, WPC has some fat in it, so it will improve the mouthfeel and the taste. And then it's much cheaper because it's 80% protein roughly versus 90%, which is WPI.
Right.
So that's how it started. And then during that time, that was when a lot of the leucine, let's just call it leucine hype, was kind of coming out, where more recognition that leucine is the most important amino acid to trigger muscle protein synthesis. You should be looking at the leucine content in your meals to maximize this and anabolism. And so what we started doing was WPC fortified with leucine. So we put like leucine sprinkles in it to hit that 3-gram threshold, because WPC is a little bit lower, obviously, like I said, in protein and thus in leucine. So that worked for a little while, and then the problem is leucine is pretty hydrophobic. It kind of sits at the top. People liked it a little bit. They thought it looked like confetti, but then a lot of the protein spiking stuff came out, and then pretty much the rule by the FDA standard is that you can't claim, if you fortify a protein with more amino acids, you can't claim those as protein.
Correct.
And you can't claim them as, it's a weird claim thing. So the next step was find a protein that's natively higher in leucine. So then we switched to an ion exchange isolate, which is super high, like 11% leucine. In one 30-gram scoop, it was like 3.4, like really, really high, way above the standard of most other things.
Yeah.
We switched to that for a pretty significant period of time, 2-3 years, but it was stupid expensive. Like the product cost us over $20 a unit to make. Most companies would never, ever tolerate that.
Right.
And we couldn't anymore either, because it was basically a loss leader. Like we didn't make any money on it. It cost us over $20,000 to restock, just 500-600 units. We just couldn't keep doing it. And protein sales in a market that's already so saturated, it's, if you're a protein only company in 2018, you're going to fail. That's just, and everybody said that to me in the beginning when I started the company too, is like, you are starting off on the hardest possible product. Anyway, so we switched. The last switch we made was going back to a blend, adding lactase, so people who are lactose intolerant can drink it, can have it, using some other interesting ingredients that you wouldn't know by reading the label. So we use WPC and WPI, but a section of our WPC is a processed WPC that actually is microbeaded. So when you drink it, it tastes like cream. It's a fat replacement.
Interesting.
So you can actually create the feeling of fat and creaminess without using fat. So it can count towards your protein count because it is WPC, but it actually gives it a creamier taste without using any kind of fat or creams.
Yeah.
So we've been using that for the past couple years. And so to answer your question, basically we went with that blend and that ratio of blends to still get the highest amino acid score we can, and then maximize flavor and taste as well, and mixability.
Gotcha. And y'all have interesting flavors, so salted caramel, candy bar, and white cake. Why steer clear? Because I think your average consumer is going to be more inclined to buy the chocolate, vanilla, maybe strawberry, than I would say more of the designer flavors. What led y'all down this route? I'm glad y'all are doing something different than the standard boring flavors, because I feel like those have been done to death, and most of the chocolates on the market I'm not overly pleased with. They're more milk chocolatey or wheat chocolates, and I like dark, thick, robust kind of chocolate flavored protein. So why those 3 flavors, and have you been asked to do more standard versions or more standard flavors?
So we've actually never had anybody request that. the first really flavor that ever took off was white cake.
Mhm.
I'll have to go back in time a little bit to fully answer that question and tell you that pretty much what I used to do, because of what I found worked best, was uh, what we just talked about 10 minutes ago, which is come out with the new flavors. So in the beginning, my means to stay relevant as just one guy blending protein himself with a cement mixer uh, is to keep coming out with new flavors. So at a certain point early in the company in like 2011, 2012, I had 20 some flavors of whey protein because that was my only product. So every month or so, I'd come out with a new product. So I was able to actually test out in practically what most companies do on paper already, just through analyzing statistics or trends in the market.
Right.
And what I saw was the best sellers were the variations of chocolate and vanilla. Because I had cookies and cream. I had this flavor called peanut butter fudge ripple, which was a combination of peanut butter, caramel, white cake, and it was like 3 or 4. It tasted just like fudge ripple ice cream.
That sounds good.
But
That sounds really good.
afraid of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to make things as creative as I could, like chocolate covered strawberry. I'll have to go back. Obviously the chocolate mints and the cookies and creams too.
Mhm.
But again, that was one of the main findings: is the best seller is white cake, and then the second best is candy bars. So those ones are going to stay. And it just so happened that I think what we found is people just took those as our interpretation of vanilla and chocolate. And I never felt pushed. And I also that's if that's boring to me, then I feel like it's going to be boring to our consumer base, and we're not going to stand out. If we just do chocolate, what's going to pull people towards us versus everybody else who's doing a chocolate? Especially now, like Amazon's in the protein game. Well, fuck, man, how are you going to keep up with them on pricing and everything? So, so it was largely that, and so it's seeing, can we actually do something, do it well, make it unique, and make it true to what the name is. So candy bar is actually, it's Snickers. So there's peanut flour in there, there's caramel, there's like real dark chocolate, and so it's modeled after each kind of component of a Snickers bar. And then white cake is made to taste just like white sponge cake that you'd have at like a formal event. And I never felt push. And honestly, I think if it ever came up that people asked to do vanilla or chocolate, I would just be like, nah, we're not going to do it.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We've touched on, you brought up the topic of CBD earlier, and obviously CBD and keto are both huge trends in the supplement industry right now. Every brand is releasing some CBD infused this and BHB laden that, and it gets to a point where it becomes mind numbing and just white noise. Where these products, for more lack of a better term, they're not going to do jack shit. How is, as you as a brand owner that wants to be successful, avoid the temptation of selling out and just coming out with some BHB keto verified CBD laden sleep supplement or something like that?
Yeah, I think there's one element, and anybody who knows me is going to probably laugh at me saying this, but there is an element of patience in it. And what I mean by patience is I'm very impatient when I have a formulation I think is ready in wanting to come out with it, just because I don't want someone else to come out with it first. But patience in terms of seeing an ingredient catch fire and waiting to see if it actually continues to hold merit and stay relevant. So there's that level of patience. And CBD is one of those. I think it has valid uses and mechanisms, but what I see the most of is everybody's trying to get a hand in the jar. And most people, at least versus the research that's out there now, most people are underdosing CBD. Like the most prominent that I've seen for doing much is around the 300 milligram level, and it's an inverted U. So you go beyond that and you overdose it, and you actually get the opposite effects that you don't want. But the problem is it's expensive, and it's expensive to get high purity CBD. Correct. So companies are going to try to do what they've done for ages, is put it in there, say they have it in there, underdose it, save money, but pull people in by saying they have CBD.
Right.
I mean, you see CBD being sold at friggin' convenience stores now, where they're selling, like your milk, eggs, gasoline, and now CBD. So there's the quality control question for me. There's the question of how can we integrate this into something that's unique and worthwhile? And if that means waiting it out, then that's what we're going to do. And then I think the other end of it is, I think there's an expectation from our customer base to stay true to who we are. And I'm not sure that, honestly, if we tried to do that we'd actually even sell much, because I think we've paved who we are as a company, at least from a formulation aspect, that if we up and try to do a quick money grab like that, we're going to get called out pretty quick. And I'm okay with that. I would expect to be called out.
Right.
It's not that I think these ingredients aren't useful or don't have applications. I think my biggest concern with them is what's taken from a medical nutrition concept or a clinical concept that's trying to be broadly applied to the entire population. And that's keto. Like people using ketogenic diets for cancer is very different than people using ketosis for the gym. And I do think that, yes, for like ultra endurance and stuff, it seems like there's some advantages for keto, but I don't think that means everybody needs to be using exogenous ketones.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Much the same. And most of the research I've seen on the exogenous ketones, most of the time it's using ketone esters, and then the ones that use BHB salts, it's not overly positive on anaerobic performance either. It just, people, when they use them, they actually perform worse either on ketogenic diets or when they're using the exogenous ketone sources.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's the waters are a little too muddy for me to want to dive in yet. And I think there's the other end that I talked about a little bit before, just on the approach towards formulating a finished product, is it's got to be I want it to taste not like what your expectation of a supplement is. Like, I want you to think, oh, this is just good tasting juice. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's difficult with things like ketone salts, ketone esters, because I've had pure ketone ester and it tastes like jet fuel. Like, it really. Yeah. So talking about trying to mask that stuff, it's a whole other story. So I'm kind of I pick my battles at this point.
Gotcha. One of the great things about the supplement industry is that we're always constantly seeing new ingredients brought to market. At the same time, there's usually one, maybe two studies that support these new patented or trademarked ingredients, and they're usually in very small populations, and they're usually not in physically active individuals. How do you, as a formulator, view these ingredients? Do you have that itch that you want to scratch and include it in a product? So, things like a few of the notable new ingredients we've seen over the past few years. We've had Dynamine, we've had Vaso-6, we've had nitrosogene. Citrapeak is a new one that's coming on the market as a new vasodilator ingredient. Pomanox is a pomegranate extract that's supposed to enhance cardiovascular health and athletic performance. Do any of these things ever jump out to you as being something worthwhile to try, or do you think that one or two studies isn't really enough to move you to try an ingredient?
I think it starts with it's a multi-step process. So it starts with the mechanism. So are you telling me that it works acutely in this random population? Well, great, fine, I don't care. Tell me the mechanism. Can I look into the mechanism? Does the mechanism make sense? If that's satisfied and it's a yes, okay, I want to try it. From there, can I replicate the effect that the study's telling me in me or other people? If it's a check mark there, it goes up another step. So it's a 5 to 10 step ladder. It's going up before I will accept what they're telling me, even if it's a published study, before I'm going to try to include it in a formula. But I think the other thing is, you can see all of these companies grabbing at trying to displace other companies or common ingredients by
taking two things, combining them together, and then trying to say that they're they're twice as powerful together. Like one of them that I've seen is I think it is the nitrosigine, which is like the citrulline with uh, I don't remember what it's combined with, but um, basically it's bullshit. uh, like I I think I continue to be very skeptical, not just for our consumers, but for myself,
Mm-hmm.
because you're talking about number one. Let's use the creatine examples. Like creatine nitrate's a good example. You're talking about making a salt of something, which now means you are yielding less pure creatine to account for that thing you're binding it with. So now you're going to underdose two things together, but tell me they're more powerful together.
Correct.
When now you've underdosed two things. Um, so again, it takes. I understand how that's appealing to a general consumer because it sounds that's great. Yeah, put them both together.
Right.
Um, but I think I'm more skeptical, and it takes. It's not so much that I need to see the product used in a population that I'm trying to apply it to. Like I don't need to see it used in athletes to say I can put this in a formulation for athletes,
Mm-hmm.
but I need to see something more than you telling me that an in vitro study proves that this ingredient is effective. And it's got to be like a well-designed study. Like a lot of times they're using a survey to tell me that this thing improves it improves cognition or anti-fatigue or sleep. Like I need something more than that. You got to give me a mechanism.
Correct.
And something that's plausible, not just like it seems like. And unfortunately, I hate to say and have to admit that a lot of scientists seem to be able to be bought and sold, but you do see that with supplements, and you need to be. I encourage everybody to question all supplements, including ours. I don't care how good you think my answers might seem. You should question me too.
Very well put. Lightening things up a little bit, what does your daily supplement usage look like and your daily caffeine intake if you're a high caffeine user?
I'm not. I actually am a slow metabolizer. So my parents didn't give me the great CYP1A2 variant. I'm okay with that because I stay sensitive to caffeine. I usually don't go above 300. If I do, I have pretty bad withdrawal. I have pretty bad. The next day is not pleasant for me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I usually take small dose of vitamin D. I've had my blood work. I get regular blood work. I just pay for it myself. I do it like every few months. Sometimes if I'm trying to chase a question, like I tend to always be chronically low on alkaline phosphatase. That has trended out of nowhere, where I used to be within the normal range. So I'm trying to answer some questions of my own on that. If that's a magnesium deficiency, I've gone down the path of zinc because I've seen some correlations with that. So I've been playing a little bit with that for the past year or so to no avail.
For the consumers, can you go into a little bit, or the listeners rather, can you go into a little bit more about what alkaline phosphatase does and why that might be worthwhile keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so it's a liver enzyme. It's also produced by bone. So it's classically used as like a surrogate marker of bone turnover. If it's very high, then you will usually have follow-up testing on, like liver or kidney function. They say that low levels, like below the normal range, is nothing to concern. There's not much written about low levels of alkaline phosphatase. But since I've had the trends of it being normal and now it's dropped off as I've aged, it's a question for me. Like there's got to be something there. So that's just me chasing squirrels, so to speak.
Gotcha.
So yeah, people only really need to be concerned if they're at a high level, and their doctor would flag it and tell them if they're high. Um, what else do I take? I take berberine. Um, I take fish oil. Those are berberine is largely just because, again, by blood work, I've had this slowly escalating fasting blood glucose level. So I'm trying to keep that in check. There is a little bit of diabetes in my family background. So I'm just trying my best to mitigate that. Berberine actually is an interesting ingredient that maybe at some point we'll put it in a product. It's comparable to the effect of I'm forgetting the
metformin.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Comparable to the effect actually on a gram per gram basis for metformin. I've used metformin before, and the gastrointestinal effects are terrible. So I don't get that with berberine, so I do use that. I use the fish oil at a fairly high dose, and I do get the most potent one I could find. I can tell you what that one is if you're interested.
Sure. For the berberine, from what I've seen, sometimes it can have low bioavailability. Is there a specific form, or do you look for one of those enhanced bioavailability forms of berberine, or take it with like estrogen or anything like that?
I don't combine it with anything. Yes, I have seen that problem. I think I will continue to be skeptical until I find something that isn't something that is directly associated with improving berberine absorption. For example, like they've done improvement in curcumin absorption with piperine, but now the industry has said, oh, well, then it must increase everything 1,000%.
Right.
No, that's not true. So I haven't so much seen anything that validates that it improves berberine absorption, and I just go off of the studies that I have seen that using it 500 milligrams 3 times a day has shown an effect. So that's what I do. Okay. I haven't, but admittedly, I haven't gone too far into nitty gritty on that one. The fish oil I buy is wait for it. It is Viva Naturals, and that has the best ratio of total fish oil to omega 3s. Viva Naturals Ultra Strength omega 3. So I largely do that not just for the cardiovascular aspect, but for the inflammation part, because I do have some chronic low back stuff from my days of powerlifting, that I'm trying to address via that rather than chronic aspirin usage. So I'd like to keep my stomach lining if I can. Other than that, creatine, I cycle through most of our stuff. Like I don't use Utopia every day. I'll use Ignite, and then sometimes Utopia, depending on what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in there that I missed that I take every day. No, that's pretty much it. I just started alpha lipoic acid to try to get a little better improvement of my fasting blood glucose. But
gotcha. Since you're experimenting with berberine and ALA, any chance we might see a GDA coming from De Novo in the future?
That's a good question. I've been asked that before. I think the problem is, one of my concerns is, number one, is there a market large enough for that? I think now with the relevance of everybody doing keto and being worried about insulin stuff, maybe there is a market big enough for it. But I worry, one, about driving people hypoglycemic, because I have had experiences in the past where, especially with ALA, like a good potent ALA can drive you hypoglycemic. And not so much that I worry about someone fainting or passing out, but it will make you overconsume. It's like you'll have a rebound bump in appetite. So that's one of my concerns. And then the other one is, when you improve glucose or insulin sensitivity, you don't just do it on muscle cells, you do it on fat cells too.
Correct.
So you need to worry about the spillover implications of that. My idea is actually going more towards putting in these longevity-focused ingredients into maybe a unique multivitamin, rather than just a GDA or something that isn't quite as versatile. So I don't know. That's an idea I'm playing with. But as of right now, no intentions to really go down.
Okay. One last question on the ALA. Were you using the the sodium salt form or regular ALA?
No, I'm using the regular, and in the past I actually was able to find, I can't remember if it's I think it's the R or the S isomer. I don't remember. One of them is more potent and actually has pretty much is attributed to all of the benefits of ALA, and I was able to find just that. I think it's the R.
Yeah,
and
it is.
But it's super expensive. So now I just use the racemic one, which is not the salt. And that's also because I'm dosing it a little bit lower because I don't want to go hypoglycemic and have this on an appetite. I do need to get my own follow-up blood work. This actually reminded me of that to see if that's influenced it. If not, I'm just going to drop it.
Gotcha. It's a lot of people also use ALA because it's a powerful antioxidant and could confer some nootropic benefits. Have you noticed any cognitive enhancing effects from its usage?
I haven't. I think you also have this fine line of. I realize that it's still a pretty catchy, popular buzzword to have antioxidants, but there is a threshold of going too far.
Correct.
Especially with adaptations. There's like the 1 gram threshold. We've been asked that actually as well for vitamin C in Utopia. So I don't really. I think this is a perfect case of your diet and nutrition should be providing those, unless you have some kind of reason where your redox status is off, like some kind of disease or some kind of imbalance, or you're going to take psychedelics and you need something that might be, cause oxidative damage that you're trying to protect from.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I have a much more conservative stance on the broad use of just antioxidants.
Gotcha. Awesome, man. Well, thank you very much for joining the show today, Ben. This was a very engaging conversation. We didn't even get to touch on any of your training side stuff. So, when we can bring you back for a future episode, maybe we can delve into the training side of things a little bit, because I know some of the listeners like it when we do that as well, not just nerd out on supplement science as we did here today. This is the part of the show where you can shamelessly plug anything and everything you'd like to about the Novo supplements or the coaching services. So go ahead, man.
I will be quick on this because I'm terrible at self-marketing. So you can check out our website, De Novo Supps. That's where all the line I talked about today is available. I am on Instagram. It's just at Ben Esgro. Don't be disappointed if I'm not very engaging or exciting on there. You can DM me if you have any questions about stuff I discussed today. And then I work with the Strength Guys. And that they're just at the Strength Guys on Instagram for coaching and programming and nutrition services as well. So you can reach them if you're interested in any of that end of stuff. But that's pretty much it. And I just appreciate you for having me on and letting me talk about the stuff I'm passionate about. So thank you. And for the great questions.
Absolutely, man. It's a joy being able to speak of somebody that's of a like mind and equal enthusiasm when it comes to supplement science. Yeah. So the pleasure is all mine. Thank you again.
We need to have these conversations together.
I agree, man. I agree. Very much looking forward to a future chat in the coming weeks and months.
For sure. I'm on board.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.